Joining us for more on the top story of the day on a sports show, which is the Congressional spending bill. Didn't think I'd say that today, but here we are, is my pal Scott Macfarlane. He's Congressional correspondent for CBS News. You might recognize the face and the name from his time at NBC4 as well, long time here in D.C. Scotty Mac, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, I mean, it's also fantasy playoff season, so we're all kind of married to the Commanders at this point, especially Jaden Daniel managers.
Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, we don't get to talk about Jaden. I would love to just talk about Jaden versus the Eagles today, but no. Earlier in the week, we all felt really good about the RFK stadium site returning to D.C. Finally, D.C. and Maryland and the senators from Maryland and whoever else was involved, Roger Goodell, had sorted it all out. Everyone was happy. And then all of a sudden, something changed. What happened, Scott?
Yeah, pardon the football analogy here, but this is the Congressional version of that Commanders-Bears game, where the game was won by the Bears till the last second when it wasn't. This thing was locked down. This stadium deal, which has been years in the making, all the negotiations, it was locked until Elon Musk started tweeting, and then it all collapsed. The bill that is carrying the Commander Stadium future is the one that averts a government shutdown and the furlough of hundreds of thousands of federal workers at the end of the week. But Elon Musk didn't like it, which means Elon Musk's supporters don't like it. Donald Trump then came out against it, and it's like a house of cards. It's gone. It needs to be rebuilt from scratch, and it got less than 24 hours after it collapsed that they had to rebuild it. It's hard to see where it goes forward from here. It's hard to see what it rides on in the future. One of the problems, Craig, is it's not the stadium deal. Nobody's got a problem with that. Nobody's objecting to the language in the bill. The objection is to many other things, but also that it doesn't belong there. And the fact that they put some non-germane stuff into this spending bill is one of the reasons why Elon Musk and Trump's allies are spiking it.
Doesn't this happen at the end of every year, Scott?
Yep, it's pretty typical, and I think the authors of the legislation knew that. They knew that if they're going to get this Commander Stadium thing in, this is the only way to do it. You jam it up around Christmas with all this other stuff Congress didn't get around to passing during the course of the year. But that's where Trump and his allies are taking their stand, saying we don't want this, not now. We have a new president coming in. He wants to do a whole lot of other things. He doesn't want to get jammed up with this thing right before he takes office. They're making the argument, Craig, this is not the year to do this typical move.
So wouldn't that have been, well, first of all, point of clarification. This thing would have gotten potentially a hearing of its own if Steve Daines hadn't held it up for months and months and months and months. So this was not a delay thing by the people in charge on the Commander side, on the NFL side. This was one single senator from the state of Montana, which last time I looked at a map is nowhere close to here, who held this thing up for months. This happens with all kinds of things that people want, around the country, and their Congress people are trying to accomplish. There is the issue that Trump is actually not president yet, and if he wants to stop this practice from happening, shouldn't it happen perhaps next year when he's actually president? But Scott, I guess I'll ask you this question. I think this is the best use of our time in trying to understand this current thing is all these lawmakers on this particular issue, but whatever this issue is for them, just spent weeks working, trying to do the negotiating, the backroom handshaking, whatever. You give me this, I'll give you that, to try to get their thing in this bill. Why don't they just vote for it because they agreed to it when Musk is now coming in and for whatever reason being like, I don't like this after they did all the work?
They're asking themselves that question right now, too. Elon Musk didn't just say, oppose this bill, shoot it down. He's saying, oppose this bill or we will come back at you in a couple of years with a primary challenge, or we'll try to kick you out of office, Republicans, if you support this bill. So, there's a political threat there, which means they kind of have to backpedal. But also, they're making the argument that their constituents in the Republican-led districts around the country voted for Donald Trump, and they want to do what Donald Trump wants because it's the same group of voters who elected them and elected Trump. They want to get in lockstep with the president-elect. But there's not an objection to the stadium deal. There's not an objection to the federal government committing to rebuild the Key Bridge in Baltimore. There's not an objection to giving billions of dollars to disaster victims in Virginia and North Carolina from the hurricanes. Hurricane Helene and Milton. The objection is jamming this all into the same bill at the end of the year when it's not relevant. If these things should have been passed earlier this year on their own. And that's the problem, Craig. It wasn't just Steve Daines. Congress is so helplessly gridlocked at this moment in time in our lives. They can't pass anything, no matter how meritorious seemingly, without having it jammed into the last second with the leverage of the government's going to shut down if you don't do it.
Scott Macfarlane, CBS News Congressional Correspondent, with us here on the Hoffman Show. And I do want to come back to the stadium and keep this on some level in our lane. But I have one more, just like I'm a consumer of politics and an American who cares about this stuff question for you, which is, if there's any hope for the next 4 years to break that gridlock, he cannot run for re-election again, which should give him leeway one way or the other to do things in a way where you don't have to worry about political consequences. For instance, that is why Joe Biden is doing the clemency stuff and all these things right now. It's because, like, oh, I don't have to face election again. Let me just do the thing that I think is right. And however each candidate defines or politician defines what is right is up to them for the purposes of this show. So if that is the case, like, is there actual hope that this gridlock will break, and that, I think, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on as a voter listening to this show, like, Congress being at a gridlock and doing nothing is bad? Like, do you foresee a near future where the gridlock breaks?
No, I think it gets worse.
Great, fantastic.
And here's why. I mean, there will be one party in control of everything in Washington next year, starting January 20th. That usually loosens things up, that party in control gets everything it wants. But there's a couple problems here. Donald Trump isn't acting like a traditional Republican. Sometimes he wants things his party doesn't like, and that's how deals get cut off at the last second, like it just did. That's how things collapse. What's more, the U.S. House, which has the power to make or break anything in law, is narrowly divided right now, where the Republicans have difficulty managing it. It's even more narrow next year. No votes to spare. Anybody has the ability to stop anything. That's gridlock waiting to happen.
Yeah, when literally any one of 200 people can be the deciding vote. That
let me emphasize something here, Craig. I think it's worth noting. There's certain spots here on Capitol Hill where you stand, you can see RFK Stadium. People know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a long history of members of Congress having a relationship with the team. So this was not a heavy lift to ultimately get this stadium deal past Congress's gatekeepers. I mean, they've had some negotiations with Maryland, and Maryland may not be done talking about it. They like Landover, but Congress is quite familiar with the team. I mean, there is, of course, the proud history of the Washington football franchise is that they kind of owned the Southeast for a while. I mean, they had the whole fan base of the Carolinas. They had parts of Georgia and Florida back when we were younger. Our parents were watching them. So Congress knows them. They know the need. They don't have a problem with this. It's not impossible they could reconstruct this in 2025 and try to get it passed again, but it goes back to the same issue. What's it going to ride on? Because they can't really pass anything on its own that isn't life or death in this moment of gridlock. So do they have to wait till the next crippling deadline to try to jam it in then? And if so, Craig, did they just set the precedent by killing it this time that they won't do it next time the same way?
Well, that was going to be my final question for you, Scott. Scott Macfarlane, CBS News Congressional Correspondent, is with us here on the Hoffman Show. What are the chances that it comes back around? Because this isn't, like, there's no left or right political spectrum on RFK Stadium. I guess, release of government land, like, I'm sure you could put it on a political spectrum somewhere, but this is not a hot button political issue. And there are very powerful entities, including the NFL, at play that want to see this done, that do have an effect in a lot of different places around the country. So now that Steve Daines has released his overlording of this issue, is there a chance at some point in the next year, if Josh Harris and the Commanders even want to bother with it, or do they might just say, screw this, we're just going to go back to Maryland and be done with it. But if they decide to give this one more go, what are the chances that it gets done before a year from now as some kind of standalone resolution, or that we're in the exact same spot yet again 12 months from now as we've been in the past 10 years since I've been covering this team, where this is happening at the end of every calendar year?
That's a good question. Do you want the straight up answer or the football analogy answer? Which one do you want?
Whichever floats your boat. If you're looking for a chance to do a football one, go for it, Scott. Go for it.
I don't get to use these most days.
I know. I'm here for you.
What were the odds the 99 team was going to win with Jeff George? I mean, there's a chance, but it really wasn't looking good after a few games. I mean, here's the thing. There's not an opposition to this at this moment on its own. This seems to have requisite support right now, this week as we speak. But if you punt this down the road, you open up opportunities for opposition to form and galvanize. I'm not sure if that's Maryland. I'm not sure if that's people who wanted to dragoon their own congressman into parlaying this to get their own stadium deal back home. Maybe this continues to get misrepresented. There are some critics who are supporters of Elon Musk who say we shouldn't be paying for a stadium with taxpayer money. That's not what's happening in this bill. It's a land transfer. So you open up the door for all kinds of opposition. You open up the door, Craig, for Jeff George to throw more picks.
No more picks for Jeff George, please. All right. Scott MacFarlane, he's made us smarter. I don't know if he's made any of us feel better, but that's not his fault. It's the people in Congress that he covers. And that's probably, Scott, frankly, most of your professional existence. So something that you were very used to. Scott MacFarlane, you can watch him on CBS News and all of their fantastic programs. Scott, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. It's nice to see you.
You as well, my friend.